Mira had learned long ago that silence was safer than words. In the castle of Valemore, where wolves ruled and voices carried weight, her silence made her invisible. She swept floors, carried linens, and served meals without ever speaking a single word. Not because she chose to stay quiet, but because she could not speak at all. A childhood accident had taken her voice, and with it, her family. Since then, she had lived in the shadows of the grand halls, unseen and unheard. The other servants whispered about her when they thought she could not notice. They called her the broken maid, the empty Omega, the girl who could not even scream if she wanted to. Some laughed at her clumsy attempts to communicate with hand gestures. Others simply ignored her, as if she were a piece of furniture rather than a person. Mira never argued. She could not argue, not with words anyway. Instead, she carried her days quietly, folding linens with careful hands and keeping her eyes low. King Draven Ashwolf ruled Valemore with a strength that made even seasoned warriors uneasy. His wolf, the spirit bonded to his very soul, was known across the land for its pride. It was said that his wolf had never bowed to anyone, not to visiting kings, not to powerful alphas from neighboring territories, not even to the beautiful noblewomen the council paraded before him in hopes of a royal match. Draven's wolf recognized no equal, and this made the king both feared and admired. Mira had seen the king only a handful of times, always from a distance, always while she was polishing floors or carrying trays through corridors he happened to walk. She never looked directly at him. Servants were taught early that meeting the eyes of an alpha king was considered disrespectful, especially for an Omega as low in status as she was. So she kept her head down and her hands busy, moving through her days like a ghost drifting through familiar halls. The Harvest Ball was the grandest event of the year in Valemore. Nobles from every corner of the kingdom gathered in the castle's largest hall, dressed in silks and jewels, laughing over polished tables filled with food and wine. Musicians played from a raised platform, and dancers spun across the marble floor beneath glowing chandeliers. For the servants, the Harvest Ball meant long hours and endless tasks, refilling glasses, clearing plates, and staying out of sight as much as possible. Mira had been assigned to carry trays of wine to the noble guests that evening. She moved carefully through the crowded hall, balancing a silver tray with practiced hands. She had done this task many times before, and she knew how to weave between guests without drawing attention. But that night, her path crossed with Duchess Celine, a visiting noblewoman known for her sharp tongue and her disdain for anyone she considered beneath her station. Celine noticed Mira approaching, and, without warning, stepped directly into her path. The tray tilted, and a glass of red wine spilled across the front of Mira's simple gray dress. The hall grew quiet as nearby guests turned to watch. Celine's laughter rang out first, cold and mocking. "Look at this," Celine said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The silent little maid can't even walk properly. Perhaps she cannot hear either, since she certainly cannot speak." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Some guests looked away in discomfort, but most simply watched, amused by the spectacle. Mira felt her face grow warm with embarrassment, but she said nothing, because she could say nothing. She could only lower her eyes and begin gathering the fallen glass and cloth napkins from the floor, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. Celine was not finished. She stepped closer, looking down at Mira with a cold smile. Does the broken little Omega have nothing to say for herself? Not even a sound? She turned to the crowd, gesturing dramatically. This is what happens when you let a mute girl serve important guests. She should be cleaning stables, not carrying wine. More laughter followed. Mira continued kneeling on the floor, cleaning the mess in silence, refusing to let her hands shake too visibly. She had endured mockery before, and she told herself this was no different. She simply needed to finish and disappear from the room as quickly as possible. What happened next silenced the entire hall. King Draven, who had been standing near the head table speaking with a group of advisors, suddenly went still. Guests nearby noticed his posture change, his shoulders tensing, as though something had struck him. Then, without any warning, without any command from Draven himself, his wolf surged forward. It happened so quickly that many guests gasped and stepped back. The king's wolf, a massive creature with fur the color of midnight and eyes like burning amber, materialized in spirit form beside him, visible to everyone in the hall through the ancient bond magic that connected alpha rulers to their wolves during moments of great emotion. The wolf moved across the marble floor with slow, deliberate steps, ignoring the stunned nobles who parted quickly to clear its path. It walked directly toward Mira. The hall fell into complete silence. Even Celine, who moments before had been laughing cruelly, stood frozen, her wineglass forgotten in her hand. Every eye in the room watched as the king's wolf approached the kneeling maid, who had not yet looked up from the floor, unaware of what was happening around her. Then the wolf lowered its massive head and knelt. It bowed low before Mira, its head nearly touching the marble floor, in a gesture that no one in that hall had ever witnessed before. An Alpha King's wolf did not bow. It did not kneel. It did not show submission to anyone, not nobility, not visiting royalty, not even to those the council had hoped might become the king's mate. Yet here it was, kneeling before a silent maid who had just been mocked and humiliated in front of the entire court. Mira finally looked up, her eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. She stared at the massive wolf kneeling before her, unsure of what to do or how to respond. She had no voice to ask questions, no way to express the shock coursing through her. She simply knelt there, frozen, staring into the amber eyes of the wolf that seemed to gaze back at her with something like recognition, or perhaps reverence. Gasps and murmurs spread rapidly through the hall. Nobles turned to each other in confusion, whispering questions no one could answer. The council members near the head table exchanged alarmed glances. This had never happened before, not in all the years of Draven's rule, not in the histories written about kings before him. An Alpha King's wolf simply did not kneel. Draven himself stood frozen near the head table, his expression a mixture of shock and something deeper, something he could not immediately name. He had not commanded his wolf to move. He had not felt any conscious decision to approach the maid. It was as though his wolf had acted entirely on its own, driven by an instinct so powerful that it overrode every lesson of pride and dominance the creature had carried for its entire existence. The Duchess Celine, still standing nearby with her wineglass trembling in her hand, opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, unable to find words that made sense of what she had just witnessed. The mockery she had been so eager to deliver moments before now felt foolish and small in the face of something none of them understood. Chaos slowly began to unfold across the hall. Council members whispered urgently to one another, some demanding explanations, others simply staring in stunned silence. Guards moved closer, uncertain of what protocol demanded in a situation no one had ever prepared for. Draven finally moved, walking slowly across the hall toward his wolf and the kneeling maid, his steps measured, despite the storm of confusion clearly visible in his eyes. As he approached, the wolf did not rise. It remained kneeling before Mira, its head still lowered in that unmistakable posture of submission. Draven knelt down beside his wolf, studying Mira closely for the first time. He had walked past her in the corridors countless times without truly seeing her, just another servant among many. Now, kneeling before her alongside his own wolf, he saw something entirely different. There was a quiet strength in her eyes, something calm and steady despite the fear and confusion she clearly felt. Draven's wolf lifted its head slightly, still not rising fully, and made a soft sound, almost like a question, directed toward Mira. She did not know how to respond, having no voice to answer, even if she understood what was being asked of her. Draven reached out slowly, not touching her, but extending his hand in a gesture meant to convey calm. "You have nothing to fear," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "My wolf does not kneel without reason. I do not yet understand this myself, but I intend to find out." He turned to address the hall, his voice growing firm and commanding, cutting through the whispers and murmurs that had filled the space. "This maid will be treated with the respect due to her, starting this moment. Anyone who mocks her again will answer directly to me." Celine's face paled, and she quickly excused herself from the hall, disappearing into the crowd without another word. The other guests, still stunned by what they had witnessed, slowly resumed quiet conversations, though the earlier mockery had entirely vanished from their tone. No one dared laugh at Mira again that evening. In the days that followed, Draven summoned the kingdom's oldest scholars and healers, seeking answers about what had happened in the hall. After extensive research through ancient texts and forgotten histories, they discovered something remarkable. Mira was not simply a mute Omega, as everyone had assumed. She carried the bloodline of an ancient lineage known as the Silent Seers, Omegas whose presence alone could calm even the fiercest alpha wolves, a bloodline believed to have vanished centuries ago. Her silence, the scholars explained, was not merely the result of her childhood injury. It was tied to a suppressed power within her, one that had never been recognized or nurtured, because no one had understood what she truly was. The trauma of her past had silenced not only her voice, but also the awareness of the gift she carried, a gift so rare that its remaining presence had gone unnoticed for generations. Draven listened to this explanation with quiet intensity, understanding now why his wolf had reacted the way it did. His wolf, more attuned to instinct and truth than words or titles, had recognized something in Mira that the rest of the court had completely overlooked. It had knelt not out of weakness, but out of deep respect for a presence it recognized as significant, perhaps even sacred, within the traditions of their kind. From that day forward, Mira's life within the castle changed entirely. She was no longer required to serve as a maid, scrubbing floors and carrying trays through crowded halls. Instead, Draven arranged for scholars to work with her, helping her understand and gently awaken the abilities she had carried unknowingly for so long. Slowly, with patience and care, Mira began to explore what her silence had always concealed. She never fully regained her voice, but she found other ways to communicate that felt more natural to her than speech ever had. Through subtle gestures, expressions, and eventually simple written words, she connected with those around her, in ways that felt genuine rather than forced. The servants who had once mocked her now treated her with quiet respect, uncertain exactly what she had become, but understanding enough to know she deserved better than the cruelty she had endured. Draven found himself visiting her more often, drawn not by his wolf's earlier act of submission, but by genuine curiosity about the calm, thoughtful presence Mira carried. Their conversations, if they could be called that, unfolded slowly through gestures and written notes, revealing a quiet intelligence and gentle strength that had remained hidden beneath years of mockery and neglect. The court eventually settled into an uneasy but respectful acceptance of what had occurred. No one fully understood the depths of Mira's abilities, and even the scholars admitted there was much more to learn about the Silent Seer bloodline. But one truth remained clear to everyone who had witnessed that night in the hall. An Alpha King's wolf, one that had never bowed to anyone, had chosen to kneel before a silent maid who had spent years being overlooked and dismissed. For Mira, the change was more than a shift in status or comfort. For the first time since losing her family and her voice, she felt truly seen, not as someone broken or lesser, but as someone whose quiet strength had finally been recognized. She had spent years believing her silence made her invisible, something to be pitied or mocked. Now she understood that her silence had always held something powerful within it, waiting patiently for the right moment to be discovered. And in the king who knelt beside his wolf that night, she found someone who saw her, not for what she lacked, but for everything she truly was.